They always say betrayal begins with silence. But in my case, it began with something far more ridiculous, a plate of peas. I'm 71 years old, not senile, not helpless, and certainly not deaf. But that day, as I sat at the dinner table with my son and his wife, watching steam rise from the food I had cooked with my arthritic hands, I felt more invisible than ever. "I told you she always makes the peas too mushy," Hannah muttered under her breath to David, my son, as she stabbed her fork into the vegetables like they had wronged her personally. David didn't say anything. He never does when it comes to her. He just kept eating. And I just smiled, pretending I hadn't heard it. That was the beginning, the spark. The first, small, harmless crack in the dam. We all lived together in this two-story house David and I built with our savings after my husband died. When he married Hannah 4 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms. I gave her my bedroom, moved into the guest room, even rewrote my will so she and David would never feel they lacked anything. She was charming at first, helpful, sweet, always calling me Mom. But like warm milk left out too long, her sweetness curdled fast. At first, it was the passive remarks. "Maybe it's time Mom stops using so much salt, it's not good for people her age." Then came the louder ones. "Mom left the stove on again." I didn't. "Mom dropped the laundry basket again." I didn't. But David believed her. The more she said, the more he looked at me differently. Like I was a burden instead of his mother. The woman who once sold her wedding ring to keep his education going. That night, after the peas debacle, I cleared the table in silence. Hannah didn't move. She never does. I bent down to pick up a spoon she had knocked off her plate intentionally, and I swear I heard her whisper behind me, "Old bat doesn't even know her place." My fingers curled tightly around the spoon. My back ached. My knees screamed. But my heart, that hurt most of all. Because I realized, for the first time, that my son wasn't going to protect me. Not from her. Not even from what was coming. I didn't say anything that night. I never do. I stayed quiet. But my mind started to remember things I'd long buried. Lessons in patience. Lessons in silence. And the most important one, how to wait. I knew then this wasn't just a bad day. This was the start of a storm. And I was going to have to survive it alone. Before we continue, I want you, yes, you watching or listening, to do something for me. If this story reminds you of someone, if it feels like a truth no one dares to speak out loud, please like, share, and subscribe my channel. It helps more than you know. And tell me, where are you from? I want to know how far this pain reaches, because I'm about to tell you how far mine went. Now, let me tell you what happened next. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of cupboard doors slamming. My knees were stiff, my mouth dry, but the noise downstairs reminded me, this wasn't going to be a peaceful day. I shuffled down in my robe, slippers barely touching the floor. Hannah stood in the kitchen with a scowl, her phone in one hand and a pan in the other. "You moved the coffee filters again, didn't you?" she snapped without turning to me. I hadn't. I didn't even drink coffee anymore. But it didn't matter. My silence gave her the answer she wanted, a blank canvas to paint her cruelty. "I swear, living with you is like living with a ghost. Things just vanish." I opened my mouth to explain but stopped. Because what would be the point? David came in seconds later, tying his tie, glancing between us like we were two exhibits in a zoo. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Your mother's been messing with the cabinets again," Hannah said. She even managed to sound exasperated, as if I were a misbehaving child. David gave me that tired look, the one that made my stomach twist. "Mom, please just leave the kitchen stuff alone." No eye contact. No concern. Just words as flat as the toast I used to make for him every morning when he was a boy. "Sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for anymore. Maybe for not dying sooner. Maybe for being the inconvenient presence they were too cowardly to admit they didn't want. Later that day, I overheard her on the phone with someone, her sister, maybe. She's so forgetful now. I don't think she even remembers her birthday. My hands clenched the laundry I was folding. I remember every birthday. I remember hers, even though she's never acknowledged mine. I remember my late husband's voice. I remember David's first steps, his first word, Mama. But none of that mattered anymore. Because she was crafting a new version of me. A senile, bumbling old woman who didn't belong in her own home. And David, he was starting to believe her. The fight started turning physical in subtle ways. A shove while passing in the hall. A cupboard door, accidentally, left open that hit me square on the temple. "Oh, I didn't see you there," she'd say with mock surprise, watching me wince as I held the swelling lump. I began locking my bedroom door. I stopped eating with them. But that only gave her more ammunition. "She's isolating herself," she told David. "It's not healthy. I think she's slipping." She had even started calling her friend who worked in senior care services. One afternoon I heard her say, "I don't know, maybe it's time we consider options. She's not safe here, she might leave the gas on and kill us all." My knees nearly gave out. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just cruel. She was planning something. She wanted me gone. Institutionalized. Branded senile. Left in some facility where I'd rot and no one would ask questions. But what Hannah didn't know, what no one ever realizes, is that women like me, old women with memories and time, are dangerous. We don't explode. We simmer. We collect. We wait. I started taking notes. Every injury, every insult. I recorded things in a little journal I kept hidden behind the loose panel in my closet. Every time she shoved me. Every time she lied to David. Every cruel word muttered under her breath. I began collecting her mistakes. Because one day, I'd show David who she really was. And that day would not come gently. But for now, I played the role. The quiet old woman. The fading shadow in the house she once owned. And all the while, the storm inside me grew teeth. It was a Wednesday when the turning point came, not a special day, not a holiday, just another weekday that began with Hannah's footsteps pounding down the stairs like she was declaring war on the floorboards. I had just set the laundry basket on the couch when she stormed in, her eyes already looking for something to criticize. "Why is this shirt still wrinkled?" she said, holding up one of David's dress shirts like it was a piece of evidence at a crime scene. "I told you to use steam, not just the iron." I reached for it gently, about to explain that I had used steam, but she flung it back into the basket. "You're getting lazy. And careless. David works hard, he doesn't need to look like a mess because you're too old to press a shirt properly." I stood there frozen, clutching a dish towel, my heart knocking against my ribs. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't careless. But her voice made me feel like I was shrinking, like I was folding in on myself with every syllable she threw. Then, she said it, the line I would never forget. "You don't do anything around here except exist. Honestly, I think we've been too kind." That word. Kind. As if feeding me leftovers and letting me breathe air in my own home was an act of charity. My fists clenched at my sides, but I said nothing. I only nodded and walked back to my room, where I closed the door slowly and sat down on the edge of the bed. I stared at my hands. Wrinkled, veined, strong despite the years. Hands that once braided David's hair when he was too little to do it himself. Hands that had held him during fevers, scraped knees, broken hearts. And now they were only seen as tools. Disposable, outdated tools. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I pretended I had a headache, just to avoid sitting at that table again. But I heard them. Laughing. Clinking glasses. She had made spaghetti, something I used to make every Sunday. She even used my recipe. I could smell the basil from my room. And it wasn't the food that made me cry, it was how easily she had replaced me in every way. A few days later, it got worse. I was in the hallway adjusting the thermostat because it had gotten bitterly cold, and I couldn't feel my fingers. Hannah came up behind me and yanked my wrist. Hard. "Stop touching things you don't understand," she shouted, loud enough for David to hear in the next room. "She's going to break the heating system again," she yelled toward him, like she broke the dishwasher last month. I hadn't broken anything. The dishwasher had a fuse issue, and I was the one who found the manual. But facts didn't matter in this house anymore. Only Hannah's voice did. David came around the corner, frowning, and looked at me like I was the problem again. "Mom, maybe you should just let us handle things around here, okay?" That was it. That was the moment the final thread of hope snapped in my chest. My son, my only child, had been fully turned. Not by a demon. But by a woman with perfect lipstick, a venomous tongue, and an empty conscience. I nodded again. I always did. Then, I went into the garage where the old boxes were kept. I found my late husband's dusty toolbox, pulled out an old camera we once used for family vacations, and tested it. The red light blinked. It still worked. Technology had moved on, but so had I. I found 3 hidden spots around the house and set them up slowly, carefully, one in the kitchen cabinet, one in the hallway bookshelf, and the last near the laundry room door. Places where she was most cruel. Places where the truth lived. Because if David couldn't see with his own eyes, I would show him mine. The first time I watched the footage, I cried, not because I was surprised, but because seeing it confirmed what I had tried for so long to convince myself wasn't real. There I was on screen, bent over with a bruised arm, flinching as Hannah slammed a door behind me. Another clip showed her pouring out the soup I had just made and saying to the camera, unknowingly, "Let's see how the old bat explains this mess." Her words slithered like poison across the screen. I paused the footage and took a shaky breath. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't losing my mind. It was all real. And now, I had proof. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with my fingers wrapped around the little flash drive where I saved the footage. I thought about handing it to David. Thought about confronting him with the truth. But something stopped me. What if he still didn't believe me? What if he turned it around, said I faked it somehow? I couldn't risk it, not yet. The wound in my heart was still too fresh, and the scar he'd left by believing her over me was still bleeding. So I waited. I needed something more. Something undeniable. The next morning, Hannah was in a foul mood. I'd done nothing wrong, but that had never stopped her. "Why are you still using that old perfume?" she snapped as I passed her in the hallway. "It smells like a funeral home in here." I kept walking. Her insults were like gnats now, annoying, but nothing I couldn't swat away when the time came. Later, I made tea, careful to keep quiet in the kitchen. But as I turned around, she appeared behind me, snatching the teapot from my hands and pouring it out in the sink. "You didn't wash this properly. There was dust in it, you could have killed me." Her voice rose higher and louder, designed not for truth but for performance, for David to hear. And he did. He came into the kitchen just as I was drying my trembling hands. "What happened?" he asked. Hannah turned on the waterworks instantly. "She's not well, David. She's getting reckless. What if she forgets to turn off the stove next time? What if she hurts herself, or us?" He looked at me with concern now, and for a moment, I thought he'd see through her tears. But he only said, "Maybe we need to talk, Mom. About help." Help. That cursed word. The one people use when they want to push you away gently, make you doubt yourself, shuffle you out of your own life. I nodded again. My voice stayed quiet. But inside, I was already building my plan. That night, I pulled out the small locked drawer in my closet where I kept some things Hannah had never touched. Inside was a yellowed envelope, legal documents, including the deed to the house. Though David paid the mortgage, my husband had put the house in both our names. What Hannah didn't know, what even David forgot, was that I still owned half this place. And with a few legal moves, I could do much more than they imagined. The next morning, I visited an old friend. Evelyn. A retired paralegal who now volunteered at the library. She'd always had a sharp mind, and she listened as I laid everything out, quietly, calmly, with the camera footage saved on a hidden drive in my purse. "This is emotional abuse," she said. "Psychological warfare. And it's all here." She handed back the flash drive, eyes narrow with quiet rage. "You have a case, Clara. But if you really want justice, you need to wait until she crosses the final line." "I will," I said. "And she will." Back at home, the atmosphere had shifted. I think she could sense I was no longer afraid. She watched me more closely, narrowed her eyes when I passed. But I never raised my voice. Never spoke back. I just smiled politely, did my chores, and added a few more hours of footage to my growing collection. Because revenge wasn't just coming. I was feeding it, nurturing it, letting it grow in silence. By the end of that week, something had changed in Hannah. Her insults were sharper, more frequent, as if she were trying to provoke a response, to bait me into losing my temper. She wanted a scene. She wanted David to catch me screaming, yelling, breaking down. And she nearly got her wish. It was during a Sunday morning cleaning. I was dusting the living room shelves, carefully moving framed photos that used to mean something to this family. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up a picture of David as a child, his smile wide, his arm around my neck, our eyes filled with love. Just as I was placing it back, Hannah stormed in and slapped the frame from my hand. Glass shattered across the floor. "Can't you even hold a damn picture now?" she shrieked. "You're going to destroy this house one mess at a time." I froze. My heart was thudding so loud I thought it might drown her out. My hands hung in the air, suspended over broken glass and old memories. She towered over me, the picture of rage. "Maybe it's time you finally go," she hissed. "You've lived your life, Clara. Let us live ours. You're not needed here." My lips parted, not with words, but with breath. Because for the first time, I felt the fire rise from my chest to my mouth. I almost told her everything right then and there, about the cameras, the footage, the deed. But something deeper held me back. No. Not yet. I hadn't suffered all this for a weak ending. I wanted this to end with finality. With silence shattered and lies crushed under truth so loud no one could ignore it. Instead, I bent down slowly, ignoring the glass biting into my knees, and picked up the photograph. "You missed a piece," I whispered. She glared, confused, then scoffed and stormed out. My palms were bleeding, but my mind was crystal clear. Later that day, David sat me down in the kitchen. His voice was soft, the way it used to be when he was asking for forgiveness after breaking something. "Mom," he said, "Hannah thinks it's time we consider an assisted living facility. Just to explore the idea. She's worried, and honestly, I've been worried too." I looked at him long and hard. "My son. My boy." His face was drawn, unsure, manipulated like a puppet wrapped in honey-coated lies. I smiled weakly and nodded. "Of course. If that's what you think is best." His shoulders dropped in relief. He patted my hand like I was already gone. "Thank you, Mom. This is going to make things easier for everyone." Easier. That word haunted me that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while rain tapped against the windowpane like the sound of time ticking away. I thought about everything I had done for him. Every sacrifice. Every sleepless night, every aching bone, every meal cooked with love he no longer remembered. And that's when I knew, the time had come. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I printed everything, transcripts, stills from the videos, footage labeled by date and time. I made copies and backups. I placed them in folders, sealed them in envelopes, labeled each one clearly. One for David. One for my lawyer. And one to mail, just in case. I called Evelyn again. It's time, I said. Her voice was steady. I'll be ready. Because they were planning to ship me off, to lock me away from my own life and rewrite history. But I wasn't going to disappear. No. I was going to be unforgettable. I waited until Friday. It was the day David always worked late, and Hannah took her wine earlier than usual. By 6 p.m., she was already 2 glasses in, and I knew her edges would start to fray. I made dinner, just like always. Roasted vegetables, chicken breasts, mashed potatoes. I seasoned everything perfectly, served it hot, and placed her plate gently in front of her. Smells decent, she muttered, not even looking up from her phone. I sat across from her with my own plate and said nothing. I only watched. By the second bite, she started complaining. You put garlic in the potatoes? You know it gives me acid. Then she pushed her plate away. God, I can't eat this trash. You're trying to kill me now, aren't you? She said it with a laugh, but there was venom underneath. I smiled. If I wanted to kill you, Hannah, trust me, it wouldn't be with potatoes. She looked up, blinking. Her eyes narrowed. What did you just say? I held her gaze, still smiling. I said I'm done apologizing. And you should be careful. Words have a way of catching up. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. David's right. You're losing your mind. Then maybe, I said calmly, you should watch this. I reached into the drawer beneath the kitchen counter and pulled out the flash drive. Her eyes locked onto it. I placed it gently beside her untouched plate and stepped back. Play it. Everything's on there. Every shove. Every lie. Every scream you thought no one would hear. She snatched it up and laughed bitterly. What is this? Some edited nonsense? You think David will believe this crap? He doesn't have to believe it, I said, voice low and steady. He only has to see it. Her face twisted. You wouldn't. I already did. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there like a statue carved from rage and panic. In my room, I texted Evelyn one word, sent. She had everything, copies of the footage, documentation, my legal statement. All time to go out if I didn't message her again by the morning. Within 20 minutes, Hannah burst into my room without knocking. Her face was pale now, her lips trembling. You're bluffing, she said. But her voice betrayed her. It was the first time I had ever seen fear in her eyes. No, Hannah. You are. You'll destroy this family. I stood slowly, facing her. You already did. I'm just picking up the pieces. She stared at me, shaking, then turned and slammed the door behind her. I sat back down and closed my eyes. My hands were still. My breath was calm. For the first time in years, I felt powerful, not because I had hurt her, but because I had finally stopped letting her hurt me. That night, I didn't sleep out of fear. I stayed awake because I wanted to savor the silence. The silence of knowing I had turned the tide. The next day, David came home earlier than expected. Hannah hadn't told him yet. She tried to act normal, but I saw the way she hovered, the way she avoided my eyes. I knew she was scrambling, trying to find a way out. But the door had already closed behind her. Because that evening, I asked David to sit with me in the living room. I gave him the second flash drive, this one labeled in his handwriting, "For you, from Mom." He looked confused. What is this? Something you need to see. And when he did, everything changed. David watched the footage in silence. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, the flash drive plugged into his laptop as video after video played. At first, his expression was blank, confused, maybe even resistant. But then, his brow furrowed. His lips parted slightly. And then I saw it, the moment the wall cracked. It was the clip from the hallway, the one where Hannah shoved me and I fell against the bookshelf, barely catching myself. Her voice, sharp and cruel, cut through the speakers. Go ahead and fall. Maybe then we can finally get rid of you. David paused the video. He blinked. Then he pressed play again. Another scene, her grabbing my wrist near the thermostat, twisting it just enough to leave bruises I never showed. Another, her calling her friend at the senior care home, whispering about how delusional I'd become, how I was a fire hazard in the house. And then, the one from the kitchen. Her tossing the plate, breaking the frame, laughing as I picked up shards with bleeding palms. He sat there for 10 minutes after it ended. Silent. Still. Breathing like someone had punched the wind out of him. I didn't move. I just sat across from him, folded hands in my lap, waiting. Finally, he looked up at me. His face was pale, ashamed. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "Because you weren't listening." He closed his laptop and rubbed his face with both hands. I thought she was helping. I thought you were slipping. She said things that made sense, at the time. He shook his head. How could I have let this happen? I didn't answer. There was no comfort I could offer that wouldn't feel like salt in an old wound. He had made his choice. He'd handed over my dignity without even realizing it. Then came the knock at the door. Hannah. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed, trying to appear composed, but I could see the trembling in her jaw. "David, we need to talk," she said, trying to guide him away like she always did. But he didn't move. "Sit down," he said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. She laughed nervously. "Why? So she can keep poisoning you against me? She's always resented me, David, you know that. She never wanted you to get married, Enough," he said, standing. I saw everything. She froze. Saw what? All of it. The videos. The bruises. The lies. Every word. Every shove. Every manipulation. Her eyes darted toward me, then back to him. She faked it. You know how people edit things these days, she probably. "Stop talking," he snapped. And just like that, Hannah broke. Her voice went shrill, desperate. "You're really going to believe her over me? After everything I've done for you? I carried this house. I kept us afloat. She's a bitter old woman who couldn't handle being irrelevant." David took a step toward her, eyes blazing. "You're leaving this house. Tonight." She opened her mouth, but the fight was gone. For the first time since she stepped into this home, she looked small. Defeated. And alone. "Pack your things," he said. "Don't speak to her. Don't look at her. You're done here." And she knew it. She spun on her heel, stomping upstairs, and I heard drawers yanked open, bags thudding against the hardwood floor. David didn't speak to me. He just sat back down on the couch, head in his hands, like he was mourning someone still alive. But I didn't comfort him. I'd already mourned enough for both of us. The house was silent after Hannah left, so silent, it almost felt unnatural. For days, David barely spoke. He walked like a man buried in shame, eating quietly, avoiding my eyes. The guilt clung to him like a second skin. And though part of me longed for reconciliation, for an apology worthy of the years I'd endured, I let him sit in the quiet. I needed him to feel it. I needed him to understand what silence truly meant, how loud it can be when someone is hurting beside you, and you choose not to hear it. I could have thrown him out too. Could have taken back my half of the house, burned every memory of his childhood from the walls. But I didn't. Because my revenge wasn't just about Hannah. It was about him too, about how easily love could be replaced by convenience. About how blind devotion to the wrong person turns love into neglect. 2 weeks passed. I kept to my routine, watering the plants, folding the laundry, making meals I knew he remembered from his childhood. I didn't do it for him. I did it because it reminded me that I was still whole. That no matter how deeply I'd been cracked, I hadn't shattered. Then one afternoon, he came into the living room while I was knitting. He stood in front of me like a child again, uncertain and nervous. "Mom," he said, I need to talk." I looked up but didn't speak. He sat down beside me and sighed. "I don't know how I let it happen. I thought she loved me. I thought we were a team. But she lied so easily, and he stopped himself, shaking his head. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want to know what I can do to make it right." I watched the yarn unravel through my fingers. "Forgiveness isn't a gift, David. It's a process. And right now, I'm still in the middle of remembering how deeply you cut me." He nodded. His shoulders slumped, like he'd aged 10 years. "I'll wait," he said quietly. "As long as it takes." And he did. He started helping around the house, quietly, without asking. He began taking care of things Hannah had once weaponized against me. He replaced the broken photo frame with a new one, my favorite picture of us from the county fair, long before she entered the picture. And one night, he left a small envelope on my nightstand. Inside was a handwritten letter, 6 pages long, where he detailed every moment he should have stood up for me but didn't. I read it twice. Then tucked it away in my drawer. I wasn't ready to forgive. But I was ready to rebuild. Meanwhile, Hannah wasn't quiet. She called 3 times, each message more venomous than the last. First, she claimed I'd manipulated the footage. Then, she accused me of dividing the family. Finally, she threatened to take David to court for abandonment. That was her biggest mistake. Because she forgot that I still had the legal deed in my possession. And I knew things she didn't, about her own secrets, her credit card debt, the forged signatures on David's name for a personal loan she never told him about. I hadn't used it yet. But now? I decided it was time. I met with Evelyn again. "I want her to know what it feels like," I said. "To be backed into a corner. To be made small." Evelyn smiled slowly. "Then we do it properly. Legally. Loudly." Together, we filed the paperwork. David added his testimony. And within 2 weeks, Hannah received a formal notice. We were pressing charges. For emotional abuse. For coercion. And yes, for financial fraud. She tried to play innocent. Tried to cry again. But this time, no one listened. Because this time, the woman she tried to erase had become impossible to ignore. The court summons must have knocked the air out of Hannah because the next time I saw her wasn't in my home, it was in the courthouse hallway, dressed in designer black, heels clicking like a warning bell. She had tried to look unshaken, polished, still in control. But I could see it. The twitch in her lip, the nervous tapping of her fingernails against her phone, the glances that darted like a trapped animal searching for a way out. She didn't expect this. She didn't expect me to fight back, not like this. David stood beside me, not speaking, just present. That was enough for now. I didn't want his words. I wanted his witness. The hearing was just a preliminary one, but it was the first time Hannah had to hear it all, out loud, in front of strangers, under oath. Evelyn read out portions of the transcripts and played segments of the videos in the courtroom. The judge's face remained neutral, but I saw his gaze shift sharply when Hannah's voice filled the speakers. "Maybe she'll trip on the stairs this time and save us the trouble." Even her attorney couldn't hide the discomfort. Hannah tried to spin it, said it was sarcasm, said the videos were taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming. Her voice, her actions, her words, cold, cruel, calculated. When the financial records came out next, her forged signatures on David's documents, the unauthorized use of his credit, the personal loan she took out to cover her gambling habit, she went pale. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. She wasn't untouchable anymore. The judge ordered a full investigation and granted me a restraining order. Hannah was legally barred from approaching me or the property. Her face crumpled then, not in fury, but in humiliation. She wasn't being treated like a manipulative wife anymore. She was being treated like what she was, a predator who got caught. Outside the courtroom, reporters had gathered. I wasn't expecting them. But someone, maybe Evelyn, had tipped them off. And now my story was in the air, whispered between notepads and recorded on phones. At first, I felt exposed. But then I saw something else, other women. Older women. Watching from benches, listening. One even approached me quietly, touching my hand. "Thank you," she said. "For showing people that we're not invisible." That night, I slept with the windows open. Not because it was warm, but because I wasn't afraid anymore. I let the air in. Let the night touch me without flinching. David made tea and brought it to my room without a word. I took it and nodded. Small steps. Bruised hearts don't heal overnight. The days that followed were strange. Quiet, but not hollow. Hannah's departure left behind a scar, but not a wound. Neighbors stopped by, subtly asking questions. Word had spread. And people, especially the ones who'd looked at me like I was fading, were seeing me differently now. Not as some old woman to be pitied. But as someone who had survived, who had spoken when silence was expected. David began attending counseling. On his own. He never forced the subject, but I knew he was working to earn back something he'd thought he'd never lose, my trust. And me? I started writing. Not in secret this time. I sat by the window with a new notebook and began documenting everything, not just what happened, but how it felt. How easy it had been to doubt myself. How fast cruelty could hide behind family dinners and forced smiles. How many women lived in quiet pain because no one believed the soft-spoken ones. But I wasn't soft anymore. The news spread faster than I expected. Maybe it was the footage. Maybe it was the court documents. Maybe it was the simple, bitter truth that no one had wanted to believe, that a well-dressed, educated young woman could be so vicious to an old woman behind closed doors. But people talked. They whispered in grocery aisles and church pews. My neighbor across the street, who once said I was lucky to have such a modern daughter-in-law, didn't even make eye contact the next time she saw me. It wasn't shame I saw on her face, it was guilt. Because she'd seen the signs and chose to look away. Hannah's unraveling happened slowly, but publicly. She was dropped from the local charity board she once chaired. The salon she frequented posted on Facebook that all clients deserve to be treated with respect, no matter their age. And the private school where she'd applied for a PR job rescinded their offer after someone anonymously forwarded them the footage. I didn't do it. But someone did. Maybe Evelyn. Maybe one of the women in the courtroom that day. Maybe a stranger who saw their own mother in my face. And suddenly, the predator became the pariah. She posted a carefully worded clarification online, calling the videos misleading fragments and painting me as mentally unstable. But it backfired. Because people had seen the full recordings. And worse, for her, they had started digging deeper. Turns out, I wasn't her first target. A former coworker spoke up about Hannah bullying her during a maternity leave. A cousin posted cryptic tweets about how some people wear pearls and hide their poison in their smile. She was being unmasked, piece by piece. Meanwhile, David changed. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But slowly, like a man thawing out from a long, shameful winter. He started listening more. Speaking less. He apologized again, not with words this time, but in actions. Fixing the creaky stairs I'd stopped using out of fear. Painting the guest room I'd lived in while they took the master suite. Asking if I wanted to go for walks again, like we used to. I didn't say yes at first. I wasn't ready to pretend things were okay. But one morning, I opened my bedroom door and found a small photo album sitting on the floor. Inside were pictures of us, me and him, at every stage of life. Our first home. His graduation. His wedding. And then, the last page, a new photo. Just me. Taken recently. Sitting in the garden. Alone, but strong. On the back, he'd written, "You raised me to be better than I was. I'm trying now." I hope that counts for something. It did. A little. But there was still one thing left to do. I hadn't mailed the final envelope. The one addressed to Hannah's parents. A long letter. A copy of the footage. A list of everything she'd done, not just to me, but to David. Because they still thought their daughter was the golden girl, the perfect wife, the sophisticated success story. I held that envelope in my hands one night, debating whether revenge needed to go that far. And then I remembered the look on her face, the night she accused me of rotting in the house like spoiled furniture. Yes. It needed to go that far. I walked to the postbox at dawn and dropped it in. Some things deserve to burn all the way down. 3 days after I mailed the letter, the phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. It was Hannah's mother. A woman I'd only met twice in my life, both times for polite dinners where she barely looked me in the eye. I let it ring 5 times before picking up. "Clara," she said, her voice stiff, almost rehearsed. "We got your letter." Silence. Just the ticking of the clock on the wall. I didn't believe it at first. But my husband watched the videos. He didn't say a word for an hour. Then he just got up and left the room. That's when I knew it was true. She took a shaky breath. "I don't know what to say. I'm ashamed. I'm sorry. We didn't raise her to be that way." I waited a moment, then replied, "Maybe not. But someone taught her that cruelty has no consequence." And it did, until now. She didn't argue. "I hope she gets help," she said softly. "But I won't make excuses for her again. And I'll understand if you never want to hear from any of us again." That, I believed. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't trying to shield her daughter. She had finally seen the truth, and that was enough for now. "Thank you," I said, and hung up. The silence afterward wasn't empty, it was clean. A chapter closing, not with screaming, but with understanding. That same evening, David came home with an envelope of his own. He looked different, more grounded, steadier. "I want you to see this," he said, placing it on the table. Inside were the finalized documents for the house. He had legally transferred full ownership to me. Quietly. Without asking for thanks. Without begging for redemption. "You shouldn't have to share space with ghosts anymore," he said. "You deserve peace. And a home that's yours." For the first time in weeks, I looked him in the eye and nodded. "Now we can begin." He smiled, but it was hesitant. I knew he still carried the guilt, and I wanted him to. Not forever, but long enough for him to never forget what blindness costs. The next morning, the letter I had been waiting for arrived, official notice from the district attorney's office that charges against Hannah would proceed to trial. The evidence was sufficient. The financial fraud, especially, was airtight. And more importantly, the case would be public. Hannah would finally be held accountable where it mattered most, in the eyes of a community that once admired her. But just as I was beginning to breathe again, another message came. This one handwritten, slid under the front door like a warning. No envelope. Just 4 trembling words: "You ruined my life." No name. No signature. But I didn't need one. It was her. For a brief moment, I stood still, letting the chill wash over me. Was she watching the house? Planning something? I didn't know. But I also didn't care. Because I wasn't that frightened woman anymore. I went to my closet, opened the box where I'd once hidden the flash drives and bruised photos, and slid the note inside. Not as evidence. As a trophy. Because she hadn't ruined mine. And that was the difference. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of quiet day where birdsong hummed through the garden and the scent of rosemary drifted through the open kitchen window. I was kneeling in the soil, repotting my basil, when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. Not fast. Just deliberate. I stood, wiped my hands, and peeked around the side of the house. And there she was. Hannah. Standing beside a beat-up gray sedan that didn't match her at all. No makeup. No jewelry. Just a black hoodie and jeans. And in her eyes, nothing like before. No fire, no arrogance. Just cold, flat determination. She didn't knock. She walked straight up to the front door and tried the handle. It was locked, of course. I stepped into view slowly, arms crossed. "You're trespassing," I said calmly. Her head snapped toward me, and I saw it, the flash of fury she tried to hide. "I just want to talk," she hissed. 5 minutes. I didn't move. "You lost the right to talk to me when you tried to lock me away in a care home and steal everything I had." She took a shaky step forward. "You think you've won, don't you? Parading me around like some criminal, destroying everything I built." "I didn't destroy anything," I interrupted. "You did. I just made sure people finally saw it." That cracked her composure. Her jaw clenched, and her voice sharpened like a knife. "You think David will really forgive you when he sees what this costs him? His job's already in jeopardy because of all the press. They don't want someone with a scandalous ex-wife." I walked a step closer, close enough to meet her dead in the eyes. "You think this is about his job? About your name? You hurt people, Hannah. You abused me, manipulated him, and now you're angry because I didn't stay quiet about it." She looked me up and down with disgust. "You're just an old woman who got lucky with a camera." I smiled. "And you're just a young woman who got caught." For a moment, she looked ready to lunge. But then, headlights flashed in the driveway. David. He stepped out of the car, and the second he saw her, his face hardened. "Get off our property," he said. "Now." "Our?" she spat. He stepped between us. "Yes. Ours. Mine and my mother's." She laughed bitterly. "Oh, how sweet. You two finally found your way back to each other. But don't get too comfortable. Trials are messy. And I have lawyers too." "I'm sure you do," I said, my voice low. "But I have something stronger." She narrowed her eyes. "What?" "The truth. And the patience to wait for the world to believe it." David took out his phone. "You need to leave, Hannah. Or I'll call the police." She stared at both of us for a long second, her face twitching as if deciding whether to fight or retreat. Finally, she turned and walked back to her car. But before getting in, she said something I'll never forget. "You may have won this round, Clara. But you'll never be safe." The engine roared, and she sped away. David turned to me, shaken. "Are you okay?" I looked past him, toward the driveway where she had vanished. "She's dangerous when she's cornered," I said. "But desperate people make mistakes." And Hannah had already made the biggest one of all, thinking I was weak. The next blow didn't come through fists or words, it came through paper. 3 days after Hannah's uninvited visit, a letter arrived from her lawyer. A thick packet of legal jargon intended to intimidate, confuse, and drain me. She was filing a countersuit, defamation, emotional distress, loss of livelihood. In her version of events, I had been the manipulator, the aggressor, the bitter old woman who couldn't handle being replaced. She even claimed the footage was edited, spliced together to frame her. The irony would have made me laugh if it hadn't made my stomach turn. David sat beside me at the kitchen table, the documents spread between us. He rubbed his temple with one hand and flipped through the pages with the other. "This is trash," he muttered. "No court is going to believe this. We have everything on record." "Yes," I said. "But she's not doing this to win. She's doing it to wear us down. Make us spend. Make us afraid." David looked at me, startled. "Then what do we do?" We don't blink, I said. The next day, Evelyn came over with her briefcase and a fire in her eyes. She's trying to drag this out to exhaust you emotionally and financially. But she's sloppy. Her fake claims are contradicting the timestamps on your footage. It's like watching someone lie while the truth plays on a screen beside them. Good, I said. Let her lie. Every word she adds is another nail in her coffin. But it wasn't just the legal battle she was preparing. Hannah had started whisper campaigns again. Old friends of David's suddenly stopped replying to him. One of my neighbors crossed the street when she saw me coming. Anonymous online posts began popping up under our names, twisting the truth, accusing me of manipulating David, of fabricating abuse for attention and control. I could have crumbled under it. In the past, I would have. But this time, I fought back. I published a personal essay. With Evelyn's help and the backing of a local women's justice group, my story was printed in the Sunday edition of our town newspaper. I told it all, the silence, the bruises, the gaslighting, the footage. Not with bitterness, but with truth. I wrote not for revenge, but for women who were still locked in homes like mine. Still afraid. Still unheard. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded my mailbox, some handwritten, some online. Women in their 60s, 70s, even 80s writing to me, "Thank you for showing us we're not weak. You spoke the words I've never dared to say. I'm still living it. But now I know I'm not crazy." David read every letter aloud to me at night, his voice sometimes shaking, sometimes silent mid-sentence. I think that's when he really started to see, not just what Hannah had done, but what he had allowed. The media attention brought something else too, scrutiny. Hannah's previous employer, who had been silent until now, came forward with a formal statement. She had left under internal review for behavioral misconduct. 2 other women, former friends of hers, confirmed patterns of control, manipulation, and deceit. One even offered to testify. Hannah had hoped to bury me beneath a pile of legal threats. Instead, she'd kicked up a storm she couldn't outrun. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because I knew people like her didn't just disappear quietly. They tried one last thing. One last twist of the knife. And that was coming next. It came on a rainy afternoon, the kind of cold, gray day that makes your bones ache before you even rise from bed. I had just brewed a fresh pot of tea when David walked in, face pale, holding his phone like it had burned him. "She filed for guardianship," he said, his voice a stunned whisper. "Of you. She's claiming you're mentally unfit and need a legal guardian. And she's petitioning the court to appoint her." For a moment, I didn't react. I didn't gasp or flinch. I simply sat down, folded my hands on the table, and closed my eyes. Of course. Of course she would go this far. She submitted a statement, David continued, jaw clenched, saying I'd been manipulated by you, that you faked the abuse and now you're trying to control me financially. She's trying to flip the truth into madness, I said. She wants to brand me unstable so no one believes me in court. But the videos, she knows the videos are real, I said, opening my eyes. But if she can convince a judge I'm mentally deteriorating, even those recordings will be questioned. David ran his hand through his hair, devastated. Mom. I don't know how she still finds ways to sink lower. She's not sinking, I said. She's drowning. This is what people do when they're about to lose everything. They throw every last thing they can to drag you under with them. Evelyn arrived an hour later with a fire in her stride. We expected a dirty play, but this? She's not even trying to hide how ridiculous it is. She already had a response drafted, and by the end of the day, we had filed a formal rebuttal, with medical records, psychiatric evaluations from my recent therapy check-ins, and character statements from the support group I had started attending weekly. Yes. I'd been going to a group, Women Like Me. Survivors of abuse, of neglect, of being turned invisible by those they raised. I didn't tell anyone at first. It was private. Personal. But now, those women had my back. One of them was a retired psychiatric nurse. She wrote a letter for the court, stating I was sharper and more mentally sound than most of the people she'd worked with in her career. Hannah had tried to paint me as unfit. But I had an army of witnesses who'd seen the truth up close. Still, her move shook me. Not because it would succeed, it wouldn't, but because of what it meant. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about destruction. She would rather ruin everyone around her than admit defeat. That night, David stood by my bedroom door as I folded fresh sheets. "Do you think she'll stop?" he asked. I turned to him, tired but calm. "No. Not until someone takes her power from her." He nodded slowly. "Then let's do it." In the days that followed, we pushed harder. Evelyn filed a motion for a full psychological evaluation on Hannah. We submitted our own evidence of erratic behavior, manipulation, forged documents, and emotional coercion. The court approved the motion. And that's when everything cracked. The evaluation wasn't just surface level. They dug into her background. Her school records. Her previous employment. Her medical history. What they found was damning: prescription abuse. A history of emotional instability. A string of sudden resignations and minor legal threats she'd buried before marrying David. Hannah had built a persona so carefully over the years that even she started to believe it. But once someone peeled back the mask, there was nothing behind it but rot. The court date was set for the final hearing. All of it would be presented, every bruise, every scream, every manipulated file, every lie. And at the end of it, she would no longer be seen as a victim. She would be seen as exactly what she was. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale coffee, and yet every breath I took felt sharper than anything I'd drawn in years. I sat at the front with Evelyn on my right and David on my left. He hadn't left my side since we walked in. His hand occasionally touched mine, a silent tether of strength. I didn't need it to stand, but I welcomed it to remember. Hannah entered wearing beige. Her hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes rimmed in just enough red to suggest vulnerability. She played her part well, meek, misunderstood, softly broken. Her lawyer was a man with too much gel in his hair and a voice that dripped in sincerity. I didn't flinch. I had lived with worse than him. The judge, a woman in her 50s with a face carved from stone, called the room to order. The charges were read aloud: fraud, coercive control, elder abuse, and obstruction of legal process through false psychiatric claims. I watched as Hannah shifted in her seat, nervous but still trying to project control. Then, they called me to the stand. I rose slowly. Not for drama, but because my knees had known 70 years and carried every one of them. But I stood tall. I faced the room, not as a victim, but as a witness to my own survival. Evelyn asked the questions first. "Clara, can you describe when you first began to notice changes in your daughter-in-law's behavior?" I nodded and told them about the peas. About the whispering. The subtle digs. How it grew, like mold in the corners of a house no one thinks to look at. I explained the camera. The bruises. The way I documented everything, not for revenge, but because no one believed me, not even my son. "Why didn't you leave?" Evelyn asked gently. I paused. The court was silent. Because I loved my son. And I believed that one day, he'd remember to love me back. I could feel the weight of the room shift then. When Hannah's lawyer cross-examined, his questions were sharper. "Would you consider yourself prone to confusion, Miss Hartley?" "No." "Have you ever had memory issues?" I smiled calmly. "Only the kind where I try to forget people who hurt me." Soft laughter murmured through the room. "Did you or did you not raise your voice on the recording from June 12th? "I did," I answered. After she slammed a cabinet into my arm. He blinked. "So you admit to escalating the situation?" "I admit to defending myself." "You call it escalation. I call it waking up." He sputtered, shuffled his papers, and moved on. The next few hours belonged to our evidence, clip after clip, document after document. The audience shifted uncomfortably with each new video. And then Hannah was called to the stand. She tried. She cried. She said I made her feel unwelcome, that I was bitter, jealous, that I resented her for taking David's attention. She acted like the house was still hers, she said. Like I was just a guest. The judge leaned forward. And were you? Hannah flinched. Excuse me? The deed shows Clara still owned half the house. Were you a guest? Hannah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. When the psychological evaluation was read into the record, her hands began to tremble. Anxiety. History of narcissistic behavior. Propensity for manipulation in high-stress relationships. The room turned colder. By the time closing arguments began, I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't even feel fear. I felt peace. The kind that only comes when the truth has finally broken through all the noise. The judge recessed for deliberation. I stepped outside into the sunlight with David beside me. He turned to me, voice barely above a whisper. No matter what happens in there. I see you now, Mom. I finally see you. That was enough. But what came next was more than I ever expected. When we walked back into the courtroom, it felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, whispering the minutes away. Hannah sat rigid at the defendant's table, her lips tight, fingers twisted into each other like she was holding on for dear life. Her lawyer looked less confident now, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. But I could see it, the quiet dread. The judge returned, a single folder in her hand, no expression on her face. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and began. In the matter of Clara Hartley versus Hannah Greaves Hartley, this court has considered all submitted evidence, testimonies, and psychological evaluations. Based on the overwhelming documentation of verbal and physical abuse, financial manipulation, and coercive behavior, we find the defendant, Hannah Greaves Hartley, guilty on all counts. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just breathed. The judge continued. Furthermore, the court finds the countersuit for guardianship to be not only unfounded, but malicious in nature. The petitioner presented no legitimate evidence of Ms. Hartley's incapacity and instead used it as a weapon of intimidation. This court formally dismisses the guardianship request with prejudice and issues a permanent restraining order against the defendant. A hush fell over the courtroom, broken only by the sound of Hannah's breath catching in her throat. Sentencing will follow in 30 days, during which the defendant is ordered to remain within the state, surrender her passport, and refrain from any contact with the plaintiff or her immediate family. She looked over at me then, eyes wide, lips trembling, not from remorse, but disbelief. She had really thought she'd win. That no one would ever believe the old woman in the corner. But they had. Because I stopped hiding. David reached for my hand. I let him hold it. As the bailiff escorted Hannah out, she turned one last time. Her eyes locked with mine, not to beg, not to plead, but to accuse. Even in defeat, she wanted me to feel guilty for surviving her. But I didn't. Outside, reporters swarmed like bees, their microphones stabbing the air. I kept walking. I didn't owe anyone a soundbite. My story had already been told. Later that night, the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that no longer felt like grief. Just stillness. David made dinner. We sat across from each other, not speaking much. But when he poured me a cup of tea and smiled softly, I smiled back. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something real. That evening, I walked into my room and saw the flash drive, the first one, still sitting in the drawer where I'd placed it months ago. I held it in my hand, felt the weight of everything it had carried, and finally, dropped it into the fireplace. The flames licked it clean. Not out of hatred. But because it had done its job. I no longer needed proof to believe myself. I was the evidence. I thought the fire would be the end of it, that letting that flash drive melt away would be my final gesture. But peace is a strange thing. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on your door. It settles into your bones slowly, cautiously, like it's unsure it's welcome. I woke up the next morning expecting to feel different. I didn't. Not yet. But I did feel lighter. The days passed without drama. The house breathed easier. David and I found a rhythm, a quiet coexistence that no longer felt like stepping on broken glass. He mowed the lawn without being asked. I taught him how to make the buttermilk biscuits his father used to love. We laughed once, really laughed, when the kitchen filled with smoke and we had to throw the first batch out onto the lawn like flaming hockey pucks. It was ordinary. And that, after everything, felt like the most extraordinary thing in the world. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened it to find a woman standing there, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, wearing a cardigan too heavy for spring. She looked nervous but kind. "Mrs. Hartley?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Diane. I'm Hannah's aunt. Her father's sister." I didn't know what to expect. More accusations? Some veiled plea for mercy? But her eyes told a different story. They were tired. Apologetic. Real. "Can I speak with you for a moment? Please?" I nodded and led her into the sitting room. She didn't touch the tea I offered. Just held the warm cup between her palms like she needed something to anchor her. "I just wanted you to know, not everyone in that family believes Hannah's version of things. Her parents, they're embarrassed, yes, but they're still in denial. They think this will all go away. But I've known her since she was a girl. And I've known what she's capable of." She looked up at me, her voice tightening. She did something similar to my mother, her grandmother. Moved in under the pretense of helping her after surgery, but within months, had taken control of her accounts, isolated her from friends. We stopped it before it got too far. But we didn't press charges. We should have. I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch. "I'm sorry for what she did to you," Diane continued. "And to David. And to your family. You didn't deserve it. None of it." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." Before she left, she reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope. She wrote this. "After the trial. I wasn't going to give it to you. But maybe you should see it." After she was gone, I sat for a long time with the envelope in my lap. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not an apology. Not even a full sentence. Just 4 scrawled words, written with so much pressure that the pen tore the paper. "You should have stayed quiet." I stared at it, the last poison she had left to offer. Then I stood, walked it out to the garbage bin, and let it go. Because she was wrong. Speaking was the best thing I ever did. After I burned her letter in the trash and closed the lid, something shifted in me, not just relief, but a kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. I wasn't just free of Hannah's voice. I was free of the fear that came with it. No more second-guessing every step, every word. No more folding myself smaller just to fit into someone else's comfort. I had won the battle, but more than that, I had reclaimed my space. My name. My voice. And I realized, there were others still trapped in that silence. That night, I called Evelyn. "I want to start something," I said. "Not for me. For the women like me, the ones still living inside the walls no one sees. The ones being talked over at dinner tables and accused of forgetfulness when they're really being erased." She listened, then said, "You already started something, Clara. Now we just give it a name." 3 weeks later, we held our first official meeting in the local community hall. The flyer had been simple: Invisible No More, a support and justice group for women over 60. We expected 5 people. 13 showed up. They came in with walkers, scarves, stiff legs, soft voices, but their eyes? Their eyes carried decades of stories, waiting for permission to be told. I stood at the front with a microphone that felt far too large for my hand and began. My name is Clara Hartley. I was abused by my daughter-in-law. I was abandoned emotionally by my son. I lived for 4 years as a ghost in my own home. But I'm not a ghost anymore. I am here. I am whole. And I am done being quiet. They listened. Some cried. And when it was over, a woman named Joan stood up. She was 82, with cloud-white hair and trembling fingers. My daughter says I make things up, she said, voice barely above a whisper. But you made me believe I'm not crazy. The next week, we had 22 women. Then 35. A few brought their daughters. One brought her granddaughter. Reporters came again, but this time not to ask questions about the trial. They came to cover the movement. Local news ran a segment, gray and powerful, the women rising up after years of silence. The town changed, too. The pastor who once invited Hannah to lead charity drives now asked me to speak at Sunday service. The neighborhood that once turned its head now waved when I passed, some even stopping to ask how I was, really. It wasn't about praise. It was about recognition. They finally saw me. David joined one of the meetings. Not as a speaker. Just as a listener. He cried quietly in the back when a woman shared how her son left her at a hospital and never came back. Later, he told me, I don't know how I ever became part of this pattern. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life breaking it. And slowly, forgiveness started to grow, not because I owed it, but because he earned it. We were rebuilding, not the past, but something new. Stronger. Honest. I went back to the garden, finally planting that patch of lavender I'd been dreaming about for years. It bloomed under my fingers like a promise. But the final piece of closure still waited on the horizon. The sentencing. The courthouse smelled different that day. Not of dust and old files like before, but of something sharper, like finality. I wore my late husband's navy brooch on my sweater. Not because I was mourning him, but because it reminded me of who I used to be, a woman who loved, who built, who endured. And who now stood unshakable. David walked beside me, silent but steady. He didn't need to ask if I was ready. I had never been more ready in my life. Hannah was already seated when we arrived, flanked by her new attorney, a less confident man with tired eyes. She looked smaller now. Not frail, just emptied. Her hair was dull, pulled back without care. Her hands trembled in her lap, and her jaw clenched as the courtroom filled. The judge entered and gave no speeches. She went straight to the sentencing. After reviewing the testimony, psychological evaluations, financial documentation, and audiovisual evidence, this court finds Hannah Greaves Hartley guilty on all primary charges. The sentence will include 1 year in a correctional facility for financial fraud and falsifying legal documents, followed by mandatory psychological counseling, and an extended 5-year restraining order. Gasps rose in the room, but I didn't move. I stared straight ahead. The judge then turned to me. Ms. Hartley, as the victim, you are permitted a final statement before sentencing is formally concluded. I rose. Slowly. The courtroom quieted. I was not weak, I began. I was worn. There's a difference. I spent 4 years shrinking in my own home so someone else could feel bigger. I gave my love freely, and it was used against me. My silence was mistaken for permission. My kindness, for frailty. But make no mistake, I was never broken. Just waiting. I turned to Hannah. You tried to erase me. First from the dinner table. Then from the will. Then from my own sanity. You underestimated the power of a woman who has been underestimated her whole life. And now? Now you'll sit with the consequences. I turned back to the judge. I do not wish her harm. I only wish her to remember, every day, that the woman she tried to destroy refused to stay destroyed. The judge nodded. Thank you, Miss Hartley. Hannah didn't look at me. Not once. She kept her eyes on the floor as the bailiff came to escort her out. But just before she reached the door, she paused. For 1 second. As if waiting for me to say something else. But I didn't. I had already said everything that mattered. Outside, the sky was gold with late sun. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters again, but I walked past them. I didn't need their microphones. My voice had already traveled far beyond their reach. Back at home, the lavender bloomed, brighter than ever. And that night, I wrote the last words in my journal before placing it back in the drawer. I survived. I spoke. I was heard. Before we begin the final chapter of my story, I want to say this. If any part of my journey has reminded you of something in your own life, if you've ever felt ignored, silenced, or forgotten, please subscribe my channel, share this story with someone who needs it, and tell me in the comments where are you from? I want to know how far this voice carries, and how many others have waited too long to be heard. Now let me tell you how it ended. Or rather, how it began again. The trial was behind us. The headlines faded. The letters stopped coming. The town, once buzzing with whispers and judgment, returned to its slow rhythm of quiet sidewalks and polite greetings. But I was no longer the woman who swept her pain under the rug. I had transformed in full view, and that transformation did something strange. It inspired others to do the same. The women in our support group began bringing their daughters. Their sisters. One woman even brought her ex-husband to a session. He sat quietly in the back, listened, cried, and apologized to her 30 years too late. But it mattered. Every tear. Every word. It all mattered. The garden outside my window blossomed in ways it never had. It wasn't just the lavender anymore. David had planted tomatoes, rosemary, sunflowers. He came out every morning now, coffee in hand, and asked me about the weather, the soil, the birds. Little things. But they were big to me. One Sunday, I sat with him at the kitchen table while he scrolled through his phone. He hesitated, then looked up and said, "Do you want to see something?" He turned the screen around. It was Hannah. In prison. She had been interviewed by a social reform group trying to understand female offenders. The video showed her in a gray jumpsuit, hair unwashed, face hollow. She spoke softly, choosing her words like she still thought she could control the room. "I thought I was in charge," she said. "But I was only ever in control because someone let me be. When that woman stopped letting me, everything collapsed." I watched quietly. Then handed the phone back. "She still thinks she was powerful," I said. "But all her power came from my silence." David nodded. "You gave it up, and you took it back." A few weeks later, I stood in front of our growing group and announced the start of something new, the Hartley Foundation, named not after me, but after the countless women like me who had endured in silence for too long. We raised money for elder care advocacy, funded legal aid for abused seniors, and created a helpline with volunteers from across the county. I didn't expect to find purpose at my age. I thought survival was the end of the story. But healing is a story all its own. One evening, as the sun poured gold over the porch, I sat with a cup of tea and stared out at the garden. David was inside making dinner, his recipe this time. I smiled to myself. I had lost so much. But I had also found something far more precious. I found my voice. And once found, would never, ever lose it again.